Perfect. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. We're going to give a couple more minutes for folks to join in. And while we do that, I wanted to take a second for us to introduce ourselves. I know we're coming in from lots of places. So I have a little prompt for us to kind of kickstart the day because we're going to talk about storytelling. So take a couple of minutes, maybe 3-4 minutes. Introduce yourself. Where are you calling in from? And the prompt for this conversation or this session is, to me, a good story is, and fill in the blanks with some of your thoughts. So take a couple of minutes to think through this, put it in the chat, and then maybe 5 past the hour, we'll kickstart the conversation. Thank you again for being here and welcome.
With my life domination, you realize all the time we wasting. You realize all the pain we facing. Please pour a cup feminine libation. My gosh, we raising. Please sympathize all the lies we raising. Please realize all the time. Family energy, drank a couple quarters on my chorus, then I code up. If I wrote the word, money stacks for all my daughters. Never asked for payment in the womb ×9. Now we see the blood on the street ×3. Feminine energy, balance up the indestructible in the vaginal.
Awesome. So I'm starting to see a couple of responses. So yeah, just feel free to put it in the chat as you're coming in. We're trying to understand where you're calling in from, and your response to this question. To me, a good story is. So take another minute, and then we'll start with the conversation.
Spiritual, lyrical, mother saying sweetest taboo, rickle kind. If I was astonished by the level of shame, feminine energy reign. Intuition and ambition, intuition strain. Intuition and ambition running through my veins. Pour out the love, let the healing begin. The birds and the bees ain't got nothing. The birds and the bees ain't got nothing. Energy.
Okay, well, thank you for introducing yourselves, and I think we're starting to get some more introductions in the chat, so that is fantastic, especially I think for Sarah to get some context on where folks are calling in from. As you can see, pretty much various parts of the world, everyone leading some really inspiring work, and thanks especially for sharing in some of your definitions of what a good story is. I'm going to read out a few that came up here. So Monol shared that any story is a good story because it is personal to the person sharing it. I love that. Fantastic. Sarah shared, I think a good story is open-ended and leaves us asking questions instead of offering a resolution or solution. Superb. I'll read a few more. So Musingo writes, a good story is one that's educative and inspiring. And Susan says, a good story is one that identifies with the person, communicated with just a few words, expresses or elicits a great deal of love, emotions, empathy. Wonderful. A few more. I know things are coming in, so we'll let the chat stay as is, and feel free to drop in some more insights there. But the reason why we wanted to actually talk about storytelling and what a good story is is as we start off the year and kick it off with a little bit convening, we wanted to have a conversation about storytelling with Sarah. And so I'm really excited to welcome Sarah to this convening, to this community. I'll take a second to read a little bit more about Sarah's background and biography, and then we're going to actually start with a conversation. And just because of, I tend to speak faster, so I like to just share things on the screen. So I'm actually going to share Sarah's bio while I also read it quickly. So, operating on a firm belief that reality has been messed with since people started telling stories and writing histories, Sarah's work is rooted in nonfiction, but often uses the vocabularies of speculative fiction and fantasy to tweak and reimagine reality. Sarah wants her work to be a tool that opens hearts and minds to a more equitable world, and believe that the best way to do that is by making work that not only challenges conservative thought and values, but also uses experimental and playful language to challenge the way information is received. Sarah sees this as a political and playful act that simultaneously reclaims power from both dominant narratives and dominant modes of storytelling to make way for something different. Just adding to that, Sarah's work has been supported by grants and fellowships from the Jerome Foundation, the Paul Newman Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the New York State Council on the Arts, the Palestine American Research Center, and the Laba House of Study, and the McDowell Colony. She was named one of the top 10 independent filmmakers to watch by the Independent magazine. He's a recipient of the Paul Robeson Award from the New York Museum and was nominated for a New York Emmy. She's currently working on a feature documentary titled Lid, and Sarah, I might not be pronouncing this correctly, which she's co-directing with Rami Yunus, and which was selected to pitch at the Dock Corner Market at the Cannes Film Festival and Days of Cinema in Ramallah. Sarah received her BA from Sarah Lawrence College and the International School of Film and Television in Cuba, and her MFA from the Integrated Media Art Program at Hunter College. Sarah is a member of the Meerkat Media Collective and the director of the MDocs Storytellers Institute at Skidmore College, where she's also teaching a teaching professor in the MDocs program. It's a ton of incredible experiences that Sarah is bringing to this convening, and we're truly honored to have you here with us. To kick us off, and we have a ton of questions, and I know our community has brought in some questions, but to kick off the conversation, I'm actually going to invite Ian, who is our latest innovator in residence at Little Big Fund, to ask you a couple of quick opening questions. So thanks, Sarah, for being here, and passing it to Ian for the first question.
Okay, thank you, Abhi. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us wherever you are at the moment in time. And thank you for being with us today, Sarah. So just to kick things off, I wanted to know if you'd be comfortable giving us a brief introduction about the career bag theory, just so that we can all have a good understanding of where the conversation will be taking place from.
Yes. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Avi, and thank you to all of you for being here in all our different places and times. And thank you, Ian, for that question. I was hoping that we could start there, so I'm thrilled. So I, as you saw, I'm a nonfiction storyteller, mainly working in the medium of film and video. And I also run this program called the Storytellers Institute, which is basically an artist residency that happens at Skidmore College every June, where we kind of create a space for both young makers, students, and also professional makers to come together into a creative and intellectual, non-hierarchical space of learning and engagement and creation. And so every year I have the privilege of choosing a theme for the Institute. So everybody's work kind of revolves around this theme. And as you can heard from my bio, I'm somebody who's been very inspired by and really into science fiction and fantasy and speculative fiction, since I was a little kid. And I'm particularly in love with, inspired by the work of the writer Ursula K. Le Guin. And she's a science fiction fantasy writer who passed away a few years ago, wrote a truly momentous body of work, novels, short stories, and also literary critique. So, essays that thought about storytelling and narrative. And one of those essays, which is one of her most famous essays, is The Carry Bag Theory of Fiction. So this essay, which I read and it really spoke to me in terms of a lot of things that I've always thought about and always felt very frustrated with in terms of the way we tell stories, specifically, and I'm speak from the I think, and my own experience, I think specifically in the United States, but also I think, and I'd be really curious to hear if this resonates with you as well. But I think also this is kind of like a dominant paradigm worldwide, and that is this idea of the hero's journey. So Le Guin, The Carry Bag Theory of Fiction, this essay that I then adopted as the theme for the Storytellers Institute, and also as the essay that I wrote, which I think was circulated to you for Filmmaker magazine. The Carry Bag Theory of Fiction is Ursula Le Guin's basically takedown of the hero's journey. So the hero's journey is a narrative structure that was kind of codified or maybe put into words by a intellectual scholar of mythology named Joseph Campbell. And Joseph Campbell, I should have looked up exactly when he wrote this, but was probably sometime between the 60s and the 80s that he was like really active with his scholarly work. We might need to fact check that, but around then. So anyway, so he wrote this. He wrote this about the hero's journey in a book called a work called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and divisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. Mm-hmm. So this then kind of like, this is like the narrative structure that he goes on to say can be found in mythology all around the world, and has been kind of looked to as a way to define narrative structure that then is adopted in novels and film and, like really everywhere, very, very ubiquitous. And it's something that I think is especially seen in Hollywood filmmaking, which is why for me, as someone from the US, this resonates so deeply and has been so ingrained in the way I see story, and why it has become like part of my mission in storytelling to unseat this way of constructing narrative. So with that short excerpt, basically what Campbell is setting up is that story always moves forward in time in a narrative way. It features one person, and it is driven by conflict. So for me, there's a lot of problems in that way of telling story. And Ursula Le Guin, just to like read you kind of her summarization of why this is bad, and we can kind of go on from there, and I'll stop talking for a little while. She says in The Carry Bag of Fiction, she offers another way of seeing story. So she says, so the hero has decreed through his mouthpieces, the lawgivers, first, that the proper shape of narrative is that of the arrow or a spear, starting here and going straight there and thok, hitting its mark, which drops dead. Second, that the central concern of narrative, including the novel, is conflict. And third, that the story isn't any good if he isn't in it. I differ with all of this. I would go so far as to say that the natural and proper fitting shape of the novel might be that of a sack or a bag. And this idea of the sack or the bag comes from actually a kind of anthropological theory that the first tool that Homo sapiens used wasn't in fact the spear, wasn't in fact a tool of war or a tool of, hunt, but was in fact a tool of gathering, the bag, the sack, the carrier bag, a tool of collecting, of holding dear, of taking with us. And the carrier bag obviously is a form, if we think of it as form, that changes shape based on what's in the bag. And that idea, I think, is the thing to take away from all of this. That story should be dictated by the contents. Like the form of the story should be dictated by the contents, not the other way around. The form of the story shouldn't be a singular thing that then the content needs to fit into. So I'm gonna put just in the chat that last bit that I read, and it's gonna look really funny because I copied it from a PDF. But just so you have it there. Oh, wow, I think I copied almost the entire essay, so whatever. Anyway, there it is. So I'll leave it at that for now, and then we can move on.
Oh yeah, thank you, Sarah. That was really, really elaborate and really eye-opening as well. And I like that you touched on the part about decentering conflict, because I think that's something that a lot of the people here can resonate with, because being a founder of a social impact type of organization, when you meet a lot of people, the first question they ask you is, what's your problem statement? So, it becomes a really hard thing to do as a founder to decenter conflict from what you want to do. And maybe that brings me to my next question that might be a bit difficult to answer. But then how do you foresee the social impact world, well, the world of founders specifically, as one in which people tell their stories while decentering conflict and moving away from the problems and hopefully something a bit more positive?
Wow, that's such a good question. And I really appreciate, as I said before, I feel like this conversation around storytelling and narrative and how we structure it is so important in so many different fields, because we're always asked to tell the story of our story or the story of what we're doing. And I think, I'm really happy to see it resonating with you in this way. I think I don't know if I can offer a solution, obviously, because it's a really big question, but I think it's important to think about why it's important, and maybe from there we can start to think about how we do it. And so, why is it important not to lead with conflict? Why is it important not to lead with, with what's wrong, with the hardship that we're facing, with the tragedy? Why is it important, or why is it important to not only be talking about that, or to only be centering that? And I think one of the things that I feel really strongly is that if we're only saying the things that are hard, or the tragedy, or what we're facing, we're asked to do that because for some reason people have decided that conflict draws people in. And I don't think that that's true. And I don't think that that should be true if it is true. And I think that it's only a thing we can change if we practice doing something different. And I feel like what it does if we do that is it minimizes us to only conflict, only tragedy, only what's wrong with where we are, what we're doing, what are the challenges we're facing, instead of saying, like, what is happening here that is so good? What is important about this place? What is important about these people? What are the good things that we do? What are our ways of being in the world that are separate from conflict? And And, I think if we foreground those things, then we invite people into our situations, our places, in a way, that gives a much more complete picture and is perhaps also more transportative. Yeah, I'd love to hear what other people think about this too. I don't know if it's okay to open it up, but I'd be really curious if anybody has any thoughts on that, because I feel like you are all more experts in having to, this, what did you call it, Ian, conflict statement?
A problem statement.
Problem statement, yeah.
And this can totally be an open, oh, sorry, you want to go.
No, I was just saying I think it's a perfect time to open it up.
Hey, can I speak?
Yes, go for it, Jennifer.
Yes. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I'm Jennifer. I'm from Uganda. On that point, as she has spoke, I feel like if I don't bring out my problem statement or my story to the other way that shows how the story is affecting the people, and maybe I bring out the good of what is happening in my community, I feel like that I'm not really convincing a funder, or I'm not really catching someone's attention to understand my problem. So that is why I feel it is proper for me to bring up my problem statement in something that is happening, in kind of criticizing what is really happening in my community. Thank you.
Yeah. Go for it, Joseph.
Yeah, so I'm trying to understand the question. I think it was in relation to problems, and I guess the connection is to Campbell, the hero's journey. So, is the way I understand it, the hero's journey is like Joseph Campbell was an individual author who chronicled mythologies around the world. What I remember about him, right? And he was able to show how very different cultures around the world, maybe that never had contact, how some of their mythologies, or you could say here stories, some of them had similar themes that ran through them. People like Carl Jung, he was a famous psychiatrist, also was involved in some of that. He said that he had this idea of what they call the collective consciousness, meaning people were able to tap into something, and that's why some of these mythologies were very similar. Like that was Carl Jung, but I think they had a relationship, might have worked together, something like that, if I recall correctly. Carl Jung was German psychiatrist, worked under at one point Freud. Yeah, right. Yeah. But the in terms of storytelling, and you see some of what Joseph was talking about, like the hero's journey in, like, for example, Star Wars, or famous pop, focus pop movies, Star Wars, or Lord of the Rings. They have this crisis going on, this issue, problem, right? And they come of age and they go off and have this hero's journey, like Star Wars. Luke's family gets killed and he goes off, becomes a Jedi, etc. So on and on and on. But I guess how it relates to organizations, all that type of stuff, is that in many sense, there are many individuals that have issues in their community or maybe in their personal life, and we have struggle and trials and tribulations, and we, in a sense, have these journeys of growth. We don't go around carrying a lightsaber, Star Wars, but we do have some of us work with organizations, for example, right? So that's, we do have issues, community issues, that we have to deal with, ups and downs of life and all that type of stuff. So that's how I try to think of those things and make sense of some of those stories about these mythologies, the heroes, and all that stuff, how we do here in the nonprofit world, the issues we face, the stories we got to tell, the trials and tribulations, whatever it's poverty, this and that, and all of that exists. So that's how I kind of relate those things. The story of hero's journey, and then the struggles that we face, telling problems that we face, all that type of stuff. Yeah.
And I think adding on to this a little bit, when we talk about the problem statement, I think I was looking at it more in a holistic way, because when you're talking about what you're doing as an organization or as an individual, it is not just, you just don't talk about why you started. I feel like you also talk about the struggles that you faced along the way. So I think this sort of um, connects or aligns with what the author said, the one that you liked, forgot her name, but it sort of supports her idea that a story is not about this one particular hero, because especially when you're working in a nonprofit world, you work with so many stakeholders, you get so many like unexpected plots, I would say, in storytelling ways, so many characters that you meet with. Climaxes, ups and downs, like you start with a climax, you don't have a climax sometimes, it's always disappointing or it's always happy. So I think when we talk about this problem, and when you're doing it in a storytelling way, because stories is a way to connect to people that want to know about you as well. You just don't start with the problem that you started with, but everything that you faced along the way. But of course, not just focus on the problems, but as you're saying this, you also talk about how you tried to resolve it or you were not able to resolve it. So I think it's like multiple roads going multiple ways. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to jump in real quickly because there's so much I'm resonating here with what Monai, Joseph, and Jennifer have said, and I apologize if I, Manal, got any of your names incorrectly, but yeah, I feel like I hear what you're saying, Jennifer, about needing to be direct in terms of like oftentimes, when we're in a room with funders, we only have a little bit of time to make a contact and to like tell them what's going on. And I think that a way to connect with people, and I don't know, again, I think if the expectation is that we're only talking about problems, I feel as though it might be a missed opportunity for connection. And I think like the problem statement can be talked with alongside also some of the broader, maybe more positive, maybe just more daily life. Like, what is the picture of your community? What does it look like? Who's there? What does it feel like? That these things are as important because people feel invested when they understand what a place is. So these things are as important as getting to the problem. And I think can be done succinctly as well. And I think yeah, Joseph and Manal, like exactly, Joseph, I want to bring you with me every time I talk about the hero's journey, because that was like such a beautiful, that's exactly it. Like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, all of those things, like exactly. And I feel like, I think that we are trained to think that this is a good way to talk about story and to see ourselves in story. But Manal, I think, as you pointed out, like the problem then and thinking about non-for-profits and thinking about advocacy work, the problem is like it's not one person that's doing this work. Obviously, it is a collection of people who are doing this work. And I think sometimes we're told that if you feature an individual, then it's easier to connect to. And I just feel like reinforcing that leads to other problems. And I'm happy to go into those. But like, I think it's really important to center the collective work that happens in organizations. And I think also this idea of like being forced, I feel like oftentimes when we talk about the work we do, and I know this in my own work at Skidmore, it's like when I talk about the Storytellers Institute, when I'm trying to raise money for it, it's like, we did this, this, and this, and then this happened, and it was so great. And it's like, that is an imposed structure because reality is not neat and tidy. Like there's often no resolution. And I just wish that there was a way that we could have more space in the world to talk about how messy it is, how messy this work is, and then that is okay, and that we are, sometimes small battles are won, sometimes they're not, and we learn also from the mistakes and from the failures.
Thank you so much for sharing. And it's been really inspiring to hear kind of experiences shared across the board in many different cultures and contexts that we work in, which I think goes back to kind of remark on the importance of having a conversation around this. And Sarah, thank you for actually bringing that to light with this piece. The full piece, by the way, will be, I believe, published fairly soon. So we'll try to get it out to you all at some point in the near future. I wanted to, Sarah, ask you a question about this film that you're working on, and I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong again, but it's Lid. Is that how you pronounce it? Yeah, okay. And you're doing this with another filmmaker, Rami Youssef, if I'm not wrong.
Rami Yunus.
Yunus, sorry, yes. And it was really inspiring to read about the film and the work you're doing. And in this article, you talk about this one struggle that I think you're having right now as we speak, where I'll read the excerpt where you say, we also present a parallel reality through animation where the city's residents live normal lives in an unoccupied Lid, going to school, making art, throwing celebrations, free from the violence of their past and the trauma of their present. However, despite our efforts, we have not yet been completely successful, especially when presenting the film in grant proposals and pitches to potential funders. We often find ourselves returning to the words conflict, journey, rising tension to elevate the stakes of the film and make it more attractive to decision makers. This article, I think, came out in January of this year, a couple of weeks ago. How are you navigating through this struggle that you talk about? I'm curious if over the last few weeks, you've actually been able to figure out like how to best position the film to funders without having to go back to some of these words that you're trying to kind of stay away from.
Yeah, it's really interesting also because I'm on both sides of this funding situation because, I submit to grants and incubators and all this stuff for my own film work, but also we just reviewed all the applications for people who applied to the Storytellers Institute this year. So I read all of their applications and had to decide who to accept. And one thing that I noticed in all of the applications, like 95% use the words, journey, conflict, these words appear over and over and over again. And it's so interesting because to me, even as a reader, it kind of gets boring, so despite even if we think that it's what we're supposed to be doing, everybody else is doing it too, so then it doesn't stand out. So that's just something that I think is important to note from the other side. But as Rami and I mean, it's been such a struggle getting funding for the film for a lot of reasons, but we did manage to raise most of our budget. And I think the most successful ways we did that was honestly having one-to-one conversations with investors and speaking from a personal experience of what the film means to us, which is different for both of us. And just talk briefly about that. Rami is a Palestinian citizen of Israel who is from Lid, and I am a Jewish American. And so I was raised with very different narrative about the founding of the state of Israel, and have had to do a lot of work actually dismantling that narrative to open it up to understand what actually happened, and the Palestinian perspective, which has been incredibly important to me as a person. And so when we speak about the film, he's able to speak about it from the very personal experience of being a Palestinian in Lid and the daily life of the city, what it means to him to be from Lid, but also the oppression that he faces from the Israeli state. And I'm able to talk about it in terms of why this film is important, because what hopefully it will do is educate people like me who grew up with a distorted narrative of the history of this place. So one thing that I did after writing this essay was I actually went back in all of our materials and I highlighted where it's a journey and conflict, and then presented that to Rami, and we went back and thought about different ways to phrase it, because I think also specifically with Palestine and with Israel, it's all anybody ever talks about is conflict, which is a way of erasing personhood.
That was also something that was really beautiful. You write a little bit about how that's actually a form of reestablishing that kind of that extractive mindset when you just focus on the conflict and not on the other elements. I think there was a question that Silas had, so I'm going to pass it to him, and then we can keep opening up for more questions. We've got about 20 minutes, a little bit more, so feel free to just raise your hand and we'll just call you up. Silas, passing it to you.
Hi, Sarah. Really glad to join you today. I'm also a storyteller and a filmmaker. I've actually had the last film chosen for next.
I think your volume just went off, or it's very faint.
Can you get me now clearly?
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. I was speaking, forgive me if I'm trying to really get my train of thought back. I was talking about how I have been working on the work of storytelling for now, I think it's been like 5 years, trying to just join this field and knowing the intricacies inside it, how you make a product and you have to change it every single time for it to make sense. For me, myself, I have to write it down, and maybe if I don't change it for like 2 months, that's when it makes sense for me, because every single day you come up with a new idea. So I'm really proud of your work mostly, but I have like 3 questions. Forgive me, they'll be very short and direct. One of them, Abhinav, the host, really answered, but then can you speak of your experience working with your co-directors in the case of Lead? How do you and your co-creator work together to shape the vision and direction of this project? Question number 2, what are the most important lessons you've learned throughout your career in storytelling? And what advice would you give someone, most especially someone who's not really gone outside in terms of showcasing their work outside? The last question is, can you speak on your experience with grant writing and funding? Are there any tips you can share for successful securing funding for a project that you've done so far, or maybe some hacks here and there that you've been able to explore? And yeah, I'm sure you have a lot to talk about, but just those hacks, I'm sure you have 3 or 4. Do you really have to change your story for it to fit the whatever you're going for? That's all from me.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes, I wrote down your questions so that I wouldn't miss any. So experience with Rami, how we kind of balance our creative visions. I think like we have really had we've been on the same page. It hasn't always been, I tend to make films with a collaborator, so I'm really used to collaboration and I love collaborating. It's not always easy, but it always broadens the work, I feel. With Rami, like we've been on the same page from the beginning, which has been great. We've had a really great working relationship. One of the things that I think has helped with our working relationship is we've had clear definition of like who does what. So during pre-production, we're having conversations about, what we want the story to focus on, who we want to interview, like what we want to film, all of that stuff. That's very collaborative. That's very loosey-goosey. In production itself, we broke it down that I'm a cinematographer, so I did the camera work, and he was actively interviewing people and kind of more directing me. And that worked really, really well. And in our script writing process, because again, it has these fictional elements, that was like, in some ways, the most beautiful collaborative part. We had the fortune in that moment to be in person together instead of remote. A lot of our collaboration has happened remotely. He's in Palestine, I'm in the US. He was here for a fellowship during our script writing time. So we just spent a lot of time in a room, like locked in a room with a whiteboard, like writing ideas up on the wall and just going back and forth. And I think getting things out of your head and where you can see them is really, really important. So that's some of how we've worked together. We leave space. Also, I do want to say conflict is important. It is a real thing. We all do it, and it's important to make space for conflict. And when disagreement comes up, we talk through it and we give it space, and we try to get on the same page. Oftentimes, like, I do defer to him on a lot because he's the person that's there with the really direct personal experience. And like, that's been established in the beginning, since the beginning of our relationship. Important lessons that I've had throughout my filmmaking career. I think one of the most important things that I would say is like, so this is my 5th feature-length documentary. When I made my first documentary, a friend said at the time, like, all I was doing was thinking about that feature. And I was getting really kind of like, it was making me kind of crazy, And I think in order to grow as storytellers, we need to play and we need to experiment. And that person at that time said to me, Sarah, are you making anything else? Are you like drawing? Are you writing? Are you making short films or whatever? And I was like, no, I don't have time for that. I'm only working on this feature. That's all I'm doing. It's the most important thing in the world. And he was like, no, it's not. Calm down. Like, and he was right. And I think like, it's just really important that like, if you have this thing that you're working on, that's like the end all and be all, make space for other little side projects, because that's where your voice and your technique is going to grow. Like the more you play, the more you experiment. And it also like, it's hard to be thinking of something as the most important thing in the world all the time. And like, that's not going to serve you or the project. And so when you have these other little things that you're playing with, it allows you to, to see things as they really are, as like, okay, this is just one film and many that I'm going to make, hopefully. And in terms of grant writing and hacks and stuff like that. So I guess, I don't know, there's no silver bullet. I don't have any like special hacks per se, but I do have a couple of things that came to mind. One is that, just reviewing the applications for the Storytellers Institute, it was very obvious to me who read what we were looking for in the application and who didn't. And it mattered. Like, it did make a difference in our decision-making process. And so I would say, unfortunately, like, your project proposal can probably be the same for each application, or this goes for writing grants for non-for-profits as well. Like, you can recycle some of that language, but I do feel like grantors really notice when you include additional language that shows that you have read like what they are looking for and that you understand it. Unfortunately, it takes more time, but I do think it's important. The thing that I learned with fundraising with LID is that, this film was very, very hard to raise money for. We only got one traditional film grant. I think part of it is because of the politics are perhaps a little taboo in this country, in the US. And we tried to go elsewhere too. And anyway, it was very difficult also because the film is this hybrid film that uses sci-fi language. So it's like we're challenging people with the politics and with the form. So we had the most luck going directly to wealthy people who had a connection to the place. And so we actually raised the bulk of our budget from Roger Waters, who is the one of the founding members of the band Pink Floyd, which was surprising, but he is a big pro-Palestinian human rights advocate. And Rami is a journalist and a writer. He follows Rami's work. We were doing an Indiegogo campaign at the time. I made a MailChimp campaign and we spammed him because Rami had his email address. And then he like gave us a bunch of money. So that was like this kind of wild thing. And then we kept that relationship going, and we kept giving him updates, and we kept going back to him and, you know, like making sure he was invested in the project, and he gave us then multiple other times to the project. So I'm sure, I know I wish that I had more, and you've probably heard those things from other people. So I'm sorry, I can't give you any more hacks, but that's what I've got.
Thank you. I got you.
Thank you for answering those questions. Really insightful, and you know, in many ways, I think the storytelling, documentary filmmaking field feels very similar to, I think, a lot of what many of us are doing in the nonprofit space. So very relatable, whether it's the relationship with the co-founder, whether it's talking about, you know, balancing your mission, your kind of clear vision with other things that you really want to do as well. And then that piece around fundraising was pure gold. I think we have a couple more questions. So John and then Monal are on the line. So maybe John, you can go next, and then Monal. John,
you're breaking up, unfortunately. I can't understand.
Perhaps you could type. Oh yeah, it's really breaking off. John, if you wanted to put in your question in the chat, then we'll read it out loud. Can try one more time. I think maybe that last time worked. Okay, type in the chat, and then we'll go with Monal, and then we'll come back to your question on the chat. Yeah, the internet connection is slightly weak there, but John, feel free to just type in the question on the chat, and then we can come back to you, make sure that we have your time for your question. Monal, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I think so. I work at Canopy. We work in the field of education, and one of the things that we focus on is the promotion of interactive learning. One thing about the education system here in Nepal is we focus a lot on rote learning and just securing good grades at the end of the day, and it's very prominent here. So because of that, students don't really get a space to be creative or think critically at all. So keeping that in mind, we established Canopy back in 2016. And we have this program called Katha Buno, which literally translates to weaving stories. So it's a story writing workshop that we do with little kids in school. And we focus on story writing and presentation as well. And it's a week-long program. It's not very long, but it's pretty intensive. And we only work with students from middle school, so grades 6 to 8. So that's age 12 to 15. They're notorious teenage years, I would say. And when we're working with these students, what we focus on is motivating them to be inspired from their lives to write their stories. And I think I relate a lot when you were sharing your storytelling journey as well. I was exactly thinking of these little students that we work with, and the impact that we've seen in these students with just this short amount of time, and with them storytelling and everything. So I won't go into the detail of the workshop and everything, but one thing that I would want to get an insight on from you is, when you're teaching a little child to tell their own story, you obviously have to give them a particular structure. And it is conflicting to like what we believe here, but for them, it'll be easier to express themselves in a certain structure. But what do you think, or what would you suggest us to keep in mind when we're doing this session? Like certain things that would help them in the long run, not just storytelling wise, but just presenting themselves, speaking in a crowd, even writing eventually. Yeah.
That's a great question. And your program sounds awesome. And so like such a delight to be a part of too. I'm sure you just get so many interesting stories from these kids. And I think it can be so interesting also to hear how young people kind of just naturally express themselves, which, you know, might be different than the way that the more maybe manufactured way than that we kind of are trained to put ourselves forward, which can be really interesting. I mean, I think that for me, one of the things that I think really draws people into a story, a personal story, is really this idea of placemaking or world building, you know, like maybe asking when they're thinking about the anecdotes that make up the larger story that they decide to tell about themselves, like trying to get them back into a place of deep remembering of like, what did it smell like? What did it feel like? What were you seeing? You know, these kind of more sensorial things that can be extremely evocative. And then how do you translate that into language? And this a person that I work with, Nissa Chow, she works in oral history a lot, which I think is a really beautiful methodology for getting people to tell their own stories, more kind of open-ended structure for interviewing. And one of the things that she thinks about a lot is how do you get people to be the author of their own story? And like authorship, meaning like, how do you get them to creatively express in their own voice, like their own story, you know? And I think one of the exercises that she's had us do when we talk about this is describing where you're from without saying where you're from. So like, I'm Sarah, you know, I could say I'm Sarah from New York City, but what does that actually tell you? Like, what does that actually communicate? Like, except for whatever image people already have of New York City. That's not my image of New York City. You know, I could say, I'm Sarah Friedland. I'm from a place that smells like garbage and where rats run free. That also has, you know, glistening glass sky, you know, skyscape. Like, that's much more evocative in terms of what I see as my vision of where I am. So I don't know, that's what comes to mind when thinking about this.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'll link the magazine, which has the stories of the students, so you can read it if you want.
Awesome, thank you.
I think John had a question that he dropped in the chat. So there are two parts. How do we mobilize our team to produce the best stories from our activities? And then the second one was, how can we best script our stories to give us an advantage in being able to secure grants for our project? Feel free, I know we only have about 5-6 minutes, so feel free to pick maybe one or if you wanted to tackle
Yeah,
both
no, I think
quickly.
I can talk about both of those at the same time. So I think one thing that I think always connects with me best is like the small anecdotes, the small details. Again, like this is kind of a little bit what I was saying with Monal, but perhaps a bit different. But like, you know, an event happens, you could tell the story of the whole event, but that doesn't allow you to get very deep. And so maybe asking people on your team to write about a few things that they noticed during the event, a few moments or a few like smaller takeaways, and then to really speak about why that moment was important, why it connected with you, and what that moment then speaks to the larger work of the organization, instead of like a whole, you know, 2 hours or days worth of events. I think keeping it small and allowing yourself to be descripted and connecting back to the larger goals through that kind of like deep dive into one event, I think is really important. And I think how can we best script our stories to give us an advantage in being able to secure grants? I mean, I think just again, I think this idea of placemaking, world building is really important. Being descriptive, allowing people to understand where they are, to communicate what it feels like to be there. And then like, you know, instead of the traditional stakes of like, this is important because if this doesn't happen, then X, Y, and Z, then maybe people connect to what's really valuable about the community and the place because they understand a little bit more about why it's special to you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to make a two-part an announcement and then perhaps a quick question if that happens. So for everyone here that, and this applies for every single person, there's this funding opportunity that opened yesterday. It's called the Echoing Green. It's a fellowship for young social impact leaders all around the world. Everyone can apply for it. You don't have to be registered. So please do take a few seconds to check it out. It, I believe, closes on the 4th of February. So it's a very quick window. Do take a look and consider applying for it. And I think, you know, I was preparing for this announcement and, you know, Sarah, to your conversation and you know, part of the application question, I ended up looking at some of the questions. And the first question, it's the first question of the application, is describe the problem your organization will address, the root causes of the problem, and why it still exists. And it's only 750 characters, not even words. And I just found this really interesting, kind of relating to the systemic challenge that I think also is top down. It's from some of these institutions that want you to start by telling, you know, about the problem, and then it's a little bit about the solution, and it kind of is that journey to an application.
Yes.
How will you then improve the lives of their people because of the work and everything? So not to like say you shouldn't apply for it. If you're here, you should totally apply. It's great funding. And at the same time, I think the importance of this conversation, and I think the word around like place building, placemaking, world building, I think using some of these strategies that Sarah has said to perhaps actually present a more descriptive landscape of where you're working and what you're talking about is really timely. So Sarah, all of that to say, thank you so much for kicking our year off with this fabulous conversation and inspiring conversation with you. As you can tell, I think we could stay here for a couple more hours and unpack this further. And we would love to stay in close touch. I believe, you know, we've shared the website that you had initially shared with us with the community, and I believe your email ID and some of the like information is there. So I'll be sure to circle that back. And then this article that we just talked about today, when it becomes public or available for public, we'll also make sure to circle that back. And yeah, thank you so much once again for being a part of this. And thanks also for sharing this. I think if anyone wanted to take a quick minute to copy the email address for Sarah, and if you ever want to reach out, feel free to do that as well. So thanks for your time and your insights and wisdom. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone else for joining us for the first convening of this month. We're going to have some really fantastic conversations throughout the year. So hope you can join us for the next month's convening, which is exactly a month from today. And look forward to seeing you all more closely throughout the rest of the year as well. So thank you all, and have a lovely evening, night, afternoon, and morning, wherever you all are.
Thank you so much for being in dialogue with me, and I really do mean it. Reach out to me. I'd love to hear what you're working on. And Abhi, I just want to say one thing before we close, which is like what you just said about this, you know, like obviously we are going to be asked to describe our work through the hero's journey, all of us, over and over and over again, and we're going to have to do it, and there's nothing we can do about that. But maybe after this conversation, we can all just be a little bit more aware of what we're being asked to do and why, and maybe think about if we have changed the
Oh, I think the internet just got disconnected for you, Sarah. Oh no, seems like it's frozen. Give it 30 more seconds. Let's see if Sarah's back.
Oh,
There.
I'm back. Sorry, I don't know what just happened, but I will just very quickly say what I was saying, which was like, I want to thank Abby for pointing out that like this is endemic. It's in all of our institutions, and we are going to have to describe ourselves through the hero's journey, and that's just part of being an artist or being working in non-for-profits, working in anything where you have to tell your story. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that we should all just like reject it outright and not do it. We have to exist in the systems that we exist in, but maybe we all just have can be also critical of the fact that what we're being asked to do is maybe not the best thing for our stories.
I love that. Thank you so much for saying that. And I think it definitely is the balance that we're all trying to make in many ways with different relationships, especially in the funding space. So thank you so much, Sarah, once again for your time and insights, and wishing you all a fantastic rest of your week. See you soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.